Coleman is the current president. Keep wanting to make her the past president. You ladies can turn your mics on, by the way. Just hit the top button right here. Oh, I got your mic. I'm sorry. Delisha Coleman is the president of the Black Women's Lawyers Association of Michigan, and they have met in our building. She's also my personal attorney and a great friend, and has done much for me and many for many, many years. And she's going to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Reverend, and thank you all for coming today. I am Delisha Taylor Coleman, and I am the current president of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan, and we are excited to take part with Reverend Sheffield in his speaker series, and so excited. He gave me the opportunity to come and be a moderator and said, pick someone. And this beautiful woman to my left was on that list, and I was like, oh, that one. Let me be a part of that conversation. And I think truly it is a blessing for her to be here, and for you to be able, and for me to be able to hear the words and inspiration that she generates, and just has brought new life to so many things and issues, and I look forward to sharing that with you. This is Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, and she is a phenomenal cultural leader, an activist, an educator, a writer, and an award-winning podcaster. She is also a graduate, of African American Studies at Washington University of St. Louis, which is St. Louis, Missouri is where she comes from, and also a 3-time fellow at Harvard in Institute of Politics. Closer, okay. I can't tell if I'm vibrating or not. So, but she is a co-founder of Campaign Zero, and we'll be asking her to just elaborate on some of the things that she's done and currently doing, but also perspective that she has that here in Detroit we can learn from, because just like St. Louis, Detroit is predominantly Black with the exact same issues as we've discussed earlier. Co-founder of Campaign Zero to reduce police violence, Love and Power Works, and the brand Clothing. She is a VP of Social Impact at BET and NBC News and MSNBC contributor. And she was on President Barack Obama's task force on the 21st century policing. Is that still going on?
Kind of, sort of.
Okay, well, we'll talk more about that. And a phenomenal TED Talk speaker about confidence and the impact of having confidence and generating confidence and the aspect of what comes after that. So just thank you, Brittany Packnett-Cunningham, for being here.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. I always feel so awkward when I'm present when people read my bio, because all I can think is I have 11 jobs, and that's too many. But I am deeply grateful to be here. I'm always glad to be back in the Midwest. I'm always glad to be with my people. And I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, all of you. You could have been anywhere, and I'm just grateful that you are here with us to have this conversation.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming today. One of the things that, as we were talking previously, in regards to the impact, she was one of the original Missouri protests of Michael Brown in 2014. And she just gave me a fact that I was not aware of. I'm an attorney and I do primarily criminal defense, but initially I wanted to do civil rights. And one of those things was looking at the protests of the civil rights movement and saying those people really made a difference. And a fact that she just gave me today was in regards to the time period that the Missouri protests occurred and the impact that it had that we don't know anything about. We were just like, oh, they're rioting, and then we don't hear anything more about it. But it was a major influential act in our history that is now not yet being discovered, but eventually will be. And if you could tell us a little bit about that.
Certainly. Well, today marks 9 years since the day that Darren Wilson, a Ferguson police officer, shot and killed Michael Brown Jr. in Ferguson, Missouri, about 15 minutes from where I grew up. And this anniversary is significant for me for 4 reasons. One is because in the midst of what we now call the Ferguson uprising, I met the person who put Cunningham on the rest of my name. My husband's back there taking pictures, he's a photographer, but it is extremely on brand that I met my person at a protest. Personal significance aside though, what a lot of people don't realize is that the Ferguson uprising lasted over 400 days. It was 400 days of sustained direct action, which actually makes it this country's longest direct sustained action campaign, longer than the Montgomery bus boycott. And I tell that story not to pat myself or my colleagues on the back, but to remind us of 3 things. Number 1, people are interested in that story being unknown.
Absolutely, absolutely.
People are interested in that story being unknown. See, the story that you all got told, just up the highway, just a little bit further north, in a different part of the Midwest, in a city that looks very much like St. Louis, the story that you all got told through national media was what? That we were looters, that we were rioters, that we only wanted to destroy our own community, that we had no discipline, we had no goals, we had no ideas, we didn't have any clarity about what the next step should be. There is interest in telling that story, because if we tell that story, then we can disabuse people of the notion that the people actually have the power, right? Because if people know that regular folks, children, students, teachers, elders, clergy, deacons, deaconess, mother's board, people and members of rival street organizations who were told that they could never get together, employed folks, unemployed folks, disabled people, queer people, straight people. If we tell the story that all of those regular everyday people got together for 400 straight days and made the entire world pay attention, then far too many people will get the idea that change is actually in our hands, right?
Amen.
So
Amen.
we have a story to continue to tell, especially as we look forward to this 10th anniversary next year. So the first thing to know is that uprising lasted 400 days. The second thing to know is that it truly shook the foundation of the world. When we learned how to deal with being tear gassed in Ferguson, which we were time and again, pepper sprayed, tear gassed, followed, searched, etc. When we learned how to deal with tear gas, though, it wasn't from people across the street or people across town. It was from people all the way on the other side of the world in Palestine, who got in touch with organizers and protesters on the ground in Ferguson and told us that it's not hot water showers we should be taking after we got tear gas, it was cold water showers, because hot water actually reactivates the tear gas. Telling us that it's not water we should be putting in our eyes, but milk products and Maalox and those kind of things to actually neutralize the tear gas. My friend Stephen Bradley, who was a professor at St. Louis University at the time that all of this happened, liked to say that young people in Ferguson reminded America of her responsibility to democracy, because she was clearly derelict in her duties if Michael Brown Jr. was not only dead, but laying in a pool of his own blood for 4.5 hours. And I think that that's significant because when we consider what happened in 2020, we have to recognize that a lot of those roots sprouted up for the first time for many people who had not previously found themselves engaged in any justice work in 2014. That a lot of people who started chanting Black Lives Matter or hands up, don't shoot, started hearing those words and saying those words, not in 2020, not in 2018, not in 2016, but in 2014. And there is a recognition that all of us who were on the streets have that we were but the latest chapter in a hundreds of years history of our people resisting all across the world and here in this place called America. And yet, we know that for our generation and for generations coming behind us, for so many of them, the first time they ever experienced an opportunity to make their voice heard was during the Ferguson uprising that set the whole world on fire. So know that it was this country's longest sustained direct action campaign. Know that it shook the entire world. And know that ultimately what started on this day 9 years ago resulted in legitimate, demonstrable, material change for the city of St. Louis. Because here's the other story that they don't tell, right? The number of headlines that I've had to fight back on online where reporters will say, Black Lives Matter, what's changed? Have y'all seen these? Yeah. You know the ones I'm talking about? Is anything different since 2020? Is anything different since 2014? And I'll be the first to say not nearly enough. But let me tell you what movement did in St. Louis that I believe can be a model for the entire world. And when I say movement did it, I'm talking about organizers, everyday people, clergy, grandparents, people who put their time, their resources, and their talents together to make change. We got our first Black woman mayor in the city of St. Louis, Tashara Jones, right? Yeah, applaud for that, absolutely. Tashara Jones is a movement-made candidate. And then when she got in office, she kept promises to the movement. One of the first promises that the movement made sure she kept was to close a jail called the Workhouse, right? So a medium security prison in which people were dying. They were dealing with decrepit circumstances. When it was too hot outside, it would overheat. This is a place that is actually closed down as we speak because the movement got the person elected and then held that person accountable to the promises they made in the election. Hello. Absolutely. So we got that first Black woman mayor. We got that jail closed. The movement in St. Louis has replaced the district attorney, the county attorney rather, that failed to indict the officer that killed Michael Brown. They replaced the circuit attorney, put the first Black woman in that role ever, who was a person who was a clear reformer and started to diminish the amount of arrests and nonviolent arrests that were being made, got Medicare expansion passed, got people who had never voted in their lives engaged in the process, not only as voters, but as canvassers and fundraisers, right? I mean, we're talking about a group of people who did the things that everybody said was impossible because they spent 400 days in the first chapter of that uprising figuring out how to make change happen. And so I appreciate the space to tell this story here because it's a story that folks aren't telling. And it's a story that people don't know because, once again, there is an interest in ensuring that there are not modern examples for us, by us, of what it looks like to take back what's ours. And whenever I have the chance to tell that story, I try to be able to do it. So thank you.
Thank you. That was one of the things that, in paying attention, we all think about civil rights and movements, and we think way back. But this is an example, a present-day example of a difference made from a community coming together and lasting and staying, because that's the language that they want. That is just a flash in the pants. It makes no difference. But this example tells you, it not just in Missouri, but in Detroit.
That's right.
In Grand Rapids, in our neighborhoods here in Michigan and all over, we can come together and we can make a difference, a sustained difference.
That's right.
So thank you. Specifically, not only that, in regards to looking at legislation that you guys were able to also bring, let me jump back for a moment. In regards to the sustained 400 days, over a year of coming out there, what kind of community contact, communication did you guys have to continue that fight for so long?
It was layered and complex. In a lot of ways, though, we had to engage in the creative subversion that our ancestors taught us, right? So I used to lead an education organization in St. Louis. Hey, Brittany. And I used to take our new teachers to the banks of the Mississippi River. There's a place there called the Mary Meacham Freedom Crossing. If you were ever in St. Louis and you're in downtown St. Louis, you can go to this place right on the banks of the river. And it's called the Mary Meacham Freedom Crossing because Mary Meacham, a pastor's wife, a first lady, used to help enslaved people cross from enslaved territory in Missouri to free territory in Illinois, rather, by crossing that river. And I used to bring them there because that's not the only thing that happened on the banks of that river. The other thing that happened was that her husband, John Barry Meacham, started to be one of those folks who recognized that education was freedom, and therefore teaching enslaved and free Black children to read and write was going to be a necessary ticket to whatever the next step was, right? This is during antebellum and Reconstruction era Missouri. So he is pastoring a church, he has the space. They start teaching Black children how to read and write in the basement of this church, right? And these are stories that we all have from our own communities. Plenty of us come from lineages and families where folks were teaching history when they were also teaching Sunday school, right? Where folks were making sure that the kids in the neighborhood had something to read at their house that they didn't have it anywhere else, right? Those little free libraries we see that are nice and chic and trendy everywhere, we were doing that first, right? So all of those things were happening in our community, and John Barry Meacham was one of those people who did that. But of course, because the Missouri State Legislature are some haters, and they were intentional about entrenching systemic racism, thereby hoarding the power that they had been able to wield during times of slavery, they made it illegal across the entire state of Missouri to teach any Black child, free or enslaved, how to read or write, right? So they got hip to what we were doing, and they said, nah, y'all not doing that. So John Barry Meacham got together with some other people, and he got some wood, and he got some nails, and he got a hammer, and he got creatively subversive, and they built a boat. All right. And they put that boat on the Missouri River because the Missouri River is technically, the Mississippi River is free territory. Exactly. So they literally made a floating freedom school. And so I used to take my teachers there because I wanted them always to recognize that, A, if you are engaged in any kind of education work, skills training, teaching, if you're a school leader, if you teach in Sunday school, if you simply teaching your grandchild or the child down the street how to read and write, if you are ever engaged in any kind of education work, you are engaged in freedom work, right? And so I would take them there to send that message, but I also wanted them to be steeped in the idea of creative subversion all the time. And I tell that story to say that that is what we had to employ in Ferguson, and that's what we have to employ now. They're hip to the ways we've been doing this, right? They figured out what we've been doing. That's why they're banning the books. That's why they're canceling affirmative action. That's why they're going at now the same person, Edward Blum, who has been behind canceling affirmative action. He's been funding it for years until he got just the perfect case to sue Harvard, to take it all the way to the Supreme Court to get affirmative action canceled at the higher ed level, knowing that it would cause a domino effect. That same person is now funding a lawsuit against a venture capital fund that was built for and by women of color. Yeah. There are Black women who run the Fearless Fund, and they're now being sued by that same person, Edward Blum. Right? So they're hip to what we're doing. They know that if we want to be able to increase generational wealth in our communities, we have to have the capital. And they said, we're going to go after your creation of the capital. We're going to go after your ability to access that education that we know is so fundamental. We're going to go after your ability to et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So if they know what we're doing and they have gotten creative in their attack, we have to be creative in our response. Exactly. And I think that this moment calls for us to do this. So when we were in Ferguson, a lot of creative things happened. We did what we called a Ferguson Protester newsletter because we knew that the world was getting the wrong narrative from mainstream news sources. We said, we'll be our own news source, right? Yep. You said, I'm not gonna sell out my daddy's radio station. I'm gonna keep this thing clear and based in the truth. So we said, instead of having to go to somebody and ask for them to tell our story correctly, we will tell it ourselves. We would get up every single morning, pull the articles that we felt told the story right, write articles ourselves, pull the tweets and the videos that would tell, it would be a dispatch to the world of what was happening on the street. Another thing that we did was we did open letters, what we called Ferguson Protester open letters, and I was ghostwriting these, right? So I would be on the streets hearing from people what's on your mind, what's on your heart, what do you want the world to know, taking all of these ideas, putting them together in a letter. In the end, we had about 12,000 people worldwide subscribe to that letter in under a month. And one of the things we did was we had people sign up for text messages on what we ended up knowing to be no indictment night. So the night that his killer was not indicted, these 12,000 people got a text message with a letter from us, sending them into action, right? And these people were from all around the world. They were not just our neighbors. And we put all of those folks to work on behalf of what we were doing in St. Louis. We also sent a lot of misdirects, right? You know exactly what night I'm finna talk about. So exactly. There was one night of protest where So what a lot of people don't know is that in the months following the killing of Michael Brown Jr., the police in St. Louis killed another 6 black men over 6 months. Wow. So part of what sustained our action was the fact that the police kept killing us.
Still doing it.
So, and in some ways it felt like they were showing you. That they were trying to really drive home the point that they had the power. So we kept doing this work, and our work would take us all over the city because that's where the killings were happening. And a young man named Von Derek Myers was killed in the south side of the city of St. Louis, about 30 minutes from where Michael Brown was killed. And there was one night when the protesters had marched to a local gas station, a Quick Trip, which had become kind of a symbol of the movement because there was a Quick Trip right on the corner where Michael Brown Jr. was killed, and that had become kind of a meeting place. So they went to this Quick Trip and took it over, right? The next night, the organizers tweet out that they're going back to the Quick Trip to shut it down, because the idea is that we need to stop business as usual. You all cannot proceed the way you have been without hearing from us, without seeing us, and without knowing we are intent on this changing. So we say we're gonna go back and disrupt business as usual once again. And that message gets tweeted out. The only people who ended up at the Quick Trip that night were the police. Because they were monitoring all of our tweets, and they went over to the gas station, so we didn't even have to shut down the gas station because they shut it down for us. Meanwhile, the protesters marched to the real location right past them. Right? So these kinds of creative tactics are important. There was another night also right after Von Derek Myers was killed where our good friend Kayla Reed, who's one of the most brilliant organizers I've ever met, had an idea. And it was like, you know how you watch a movie and somebody goes, got it? Like it was that moment. There was a chant that we used to say because we would be facing the police in all of their riot gear, and they would be laughing at us while we were crying and screaming, and in our pain, they would laugh at us. Tear gas. They would laugh at us. And so we used to chant, they think it's a game, they think it's a joke. They think it's a game, they think it's a joke. And Kayla said, that is a protest. So people went home and they gathered all of the games they had, the jump ropes and the jacks, the sidewalk chalk, the kickballs, the basketballs. And there was an entire street shut down, a major thoroughfare in St. Louis, Grand Boulevard. And they shut down this entire street playing these games. And what was beautiful about it was that it engaged people of all ages, of all races, of all backgrounds, because suddenly it wasn't this big scary thing. Because do you want to be the police officer who comes and tear gasses people playing kickball? Exactly. Do you want to be the police officer who comes and arrests somebody for jumping rope? There's this beautiful video of these black teenagers teaching this white Jewish grandmother how to double dutch at that protest. And that is the kind of creative subversion that I learned on the streets in that time, and that I think can be instructive for all of us, because they really do think it's a game. Yeah. They think that this is a joke. We know that this is all about our life, right? That this is about our lives, that this is about our dignity, that this is about our humanity. And operating as if it is anything less is just not a choice we can afford to make. But when we get to infuse that action with creativity, with joy, it helps sustain us. It helps build the movement more broadly. It helps bring people in that would not have joined before. I don't know that grandmother would have been in the streets had there not been some double dutch out there for her to do, right? And those are the moments that not only stick with me, but like I said, that I think are really instructive for everybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Amen. And that's the kind of thing that we need to know. It's not just showing up, but making sure it has an impact. And that's what was significant, because like I said, just like you said, there is a purposeful narrative to say it doesn't matter. It really didn't make a difference.
Yeah. So I remember I met one of the founding members of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, Cortland Cox, and he said something to me I will never forget. He said, the goal of the enemy is not just to kill you, but to kill your will to resist. And that sticks with me in part because I know he had lived that, right? That was not just hyperbole for him, that he had been doing the sit-ins and the freedom rides and had existed in all of the places where his very life was under threat. But it also was a reminder that the kind of non-stop onslaught we have of doom every single day. The forest is burning, the air isn't breathable, the water isn't drinkable in far more places than just Flint, right? Like the police are killing us, the gunmen are killing the children in the school, this, that, and the third. All of it is real, and that onslaught is meant to exhaust us. Exactly. That onslaught is meant to make us think that we are incapable of changing anything. We're supposed to have the kind of attitude about it that says, well, what is the point, right? And I don't have to suppress your voice. I don't have to suppress your vote. I don't have to suppress your activity if you do it for me.
Exactly. If you don't show up.
If you stay home yourself, then that saves me the effort, right? And so there's an opportunity we have, I think, to prove that kind of thinking wrong, and to say not only are we going to show up, we're going to show up in the ways you least expect us to, including with the folding chair on a riverfront in Montgomery.
Exactly. That is awesome. Specifically, when we're talking about showing up, things like you spoke about, I'm sorry. Oh, thank you. Republican book bans and defunding libraries.
Yeah.
The affirmative action in universities saying, we are going to stop you from these areas so that you will just dwell in the it doesn't make a difference. So what can we do in our communities here or wherever to say, let's come together, let's unite, let's make a difference?
You know, I think one of the things that we can do is connect the dots in such a way that this stuff is relevant for people. I don't get angry, for example, with young people in particular, people in general, who say, it ain't no point in voting. Because I did that last time, and my community still looks like this. My water is still not drinkable. Right? Like, I don't understand the point of making the effort if there's no return on that investment. And it is true that people died for our right to be able to show up in this way. They were killed. That's right. That is a much more accurate way to say that. Yeah. And I also know that doesn't necessarily move an 18-year-old. So I want to be effective. That doesn't necessarily mean I need to be right. Right? So if I choose to be effective more than I choose to be right, then I'm forced to ask myself, what is actually going to make this relevant? And I'm not just talking about, and you know, I'm a preacher's kid twice over, so some of this is self-effacing, but I'm not just talking about like when the pastor, you know, throws in a couple song lyrics and tries to make the sermon relevant, right? I'm not just talking about, when we say, oh, we're going to make sure we get on TikTok and make it cute. I'm talking about the fact that we actually have to hear where people are coming from, because their disengagement comes from a legitimate place. Exactly. It comes from a place that says, I've never been seen. I've never been cared for. I've never been thought about. I've never been considered when folks go up there and write this legislation. And when they say they've never been considered, they're not just talking about wealthy white people. And we need to own that. We need to own that sometimes they're talking about us. We need to own that sometimes they're saying, well, you got in the room, but you didn't leave the door open for anybody else. You got in the room, but you didn't ask me to come in with you. You got the knowledge, but you didn't share it with anybody, right? You got the money, but you didn't make sure we had access to any, right? That is a vestige of white supremacy culture. Because white supremacy culture says power is finite and we have to hoard it by any means necessary, right? African community culture, African American community culture says what's mine is yours, what's yours is mine, and what's ours is ours, right? If I got $5 and you got $0, then we both got $5, right? Exactly. There is a context to how we share with one another. But when we breathed in the smog of white supremacy that told us the keys to our freedom was to actually imitate whiteness and white supremacy culture, we lost our way.
We started to hoard.
We started to mimic what was done to us and transfer it to other people, thinking that that's what freedom looked like. But actually, me oppressing somebody else is not making me any more free, right? Me oppressing trans women is not making me any more free, right? Me not inviting young people to the table is not making me any more free. Me saying, well, I got mine, you got to go figure out how to get yours, is not making me any more free. Because as Fannie Lou Hamer already told us,
sick and tired,
right? She's sick and tired of being tired, and sick and tired, and that essentially it's not freedom unless all of us get there, right? That none of us are free until all of us are free. So I say that to say, like, there's a moment that we have in front of us to decide to go and be the kind of world that we're trying to build, to go and reject the kind of culture that tells us to mimic somebody else, to get back to our roots and values and decide how we're going to show up for one another, to build our communities, to build our spaces, to ensure that our voices are not just heard by them, but that we hear each other. And to address the disconnection that so many of our young people are feeling, not with condescension, but with care. To say, I hear you, I understand. If I wasn't doing it right before, I'm gonna do it better this time. Help me, right? Let's do it together. I've got something to learn from you and you've got something to learn from me, and together we've got something to build. That is the kind of attitude that's actually gonna set us free.
Thank you. And we spoke a bit about that. And all the work that we do, if we're not giving it or allowing our youth, our younger generations, everyone else that comes after us to partake, to see and make a difference, what is our legacy going to be?
That's right. And what was it for, right?
What was it all about?
I know that we talk and think about our ancestors frequently. I am one of those people. I had the immense privilege to do an episode of Finding Your Roots with Henry Louis Gates Jr., and I learned my ancestors' names. Wow. Right? I learned about my 4-time great-grandmother, Joanna, who had 24 children. Woo. Hold on to that for a second, right? Woo. 24 children. But the miracle of her life was that she was born enslaved, died free at least 98 years old. Wow. And the rarity of her life is that she kept multiple generations of her family together.
Amen.
So when you look at the census directly after emancipation, you see 3 generations of my family living in 2 houses next door to each other.
Amen.
And Skip Gates is like, this we never find this. Like, this never happens, because we know what they did to our families. They understood the strength and the power of the family unit, so they broke it up.
Tore it apart.
And Joanna figured out a way to keep most of her people together. So I think about her all the time. I think about whether or not I am making her proud, whether or not I am doing her name right. And I'm equally thinking about what kind of ancestor I am becoming, which is a harder question, right? I can romanticize my ancestors. I can, have all these dreams and ideas and stories in my head about who they were and what they accomplished. I have ancestors that died freeing us in the Civil War. I have ancestors that, were bootleggers, but I call them entrepreneurs. I have ancestors that, that beat the system. I have ancestors that died premature. Like, I have ancestors that run the gamut, and I can tell myself all of these stories that I want, and I have to recognize that I'm going to be somebody's ancestor one day. And I do not want them to look back on my name in shame. Exactly. I do not want them to look back and say, but she didn't do nothing, or she got hers and moved on, right? I also want to recognize that, this narrative that we are not our ancestors because, we pick up folding chairs and hurt people. Our ancestors resisted.
Exactly.
Our ancestors pushed at every single point. That is the only reason why we are able to experience what we're experiencing now. And so if they could have the foresight and the fortitude to build those things for generations that they would never see, how dare we do anything less?
Amen. I have talked your ear off, and we are going to open up the audience for any comments or questions. If there's anything that you can think of that we didn't address or discuss, like I said, you're my shero, okay?
The feeling is mutual. That's very kind.
Testing 1, 2. Okay, before we do that real quick, let's give her a tremendous hand. And
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
there is.
Thank you. God bless you. Thank you.
Having been taught by Dr. West in philosophy, there's this demiurge, there's this place where all of that stuff comes from that people prescribe different paths to be able to access, but you certainly have tapped into that.
Thank you so much.
I had a few people say to me, we have to bring her back next year, which we'll do.
I'd be honored.
I'll be happy to have you come back.
And the Black Women's
And we're going to open up for questions, but I was blessed to be around a man who has been responsible for an awful lot, but never promoted himself. And he would tell me that he called himself a race man. I mean, I knew these people. Shirley Chisholm slept in King's Home.
Yeah.
These were all people who were completely selfless, whose whole mission was to make certain that at a minimum what they were forced to experience, future generations wouldn't.
That's right.
And even if they never got to enjoy it, it didn't matter.
That's right.
Now people do everything and they want to be the ones to be the recipient of it. How do we get back to that sense of sacrifice, that sense of selflessness? And I'll say this because I pastor church, and I'm known to say things that people don't like, but I'm tired of folks that love Jesus and can't stand nobody else.
Amen.
So busy on the way to heaven and tell bells to go to hell. I mean, so even our churches, which were the salt of the, and by the way, let's be honest, I'm done. There were negligible numbers of us who participated in that.
Yeah.
There were far more of us who didn't.
That's right.
But even that talented tenth, even that minimal stream of folks we don't have. And today, this is my last point, people who do engage in this activity often want to be the beneficiaries and profit from it and only do it short term till their long-term benefits show up.
That's right. I mean, these are the questions, right? It's interesting because I find a lot of a sense of community and sacrifice from the young people that I'm in relationship with. It just sometimes looks different. And I think sometimes respecting how the language has shifted is a good thing, because that doesn't mean that we've gotten away from the values. It just means it's performing differently. We saw the results of the election in Ohio yesterday, right?
Yes. If you could,
just
quickly, there were lines, just like when Barack Obama became president, there were lines well past the closing.
Well past.
And that was because this was an issue that was an important issue.
That's right.
For those individuals to show up and
That's
show
right.
out.
We're
And
talking
that was the abortion.
Yeah, we're talking about issues of bodily autonomy and abortion. We're talking about issues of gun violence. And one of the things I found fascinating is the turnout on college campuses, right? And what that's telling me is that for all of the conversations we're having about disaffected young people, because it is very real, what is clear to me is that young people were saying, I care about myself and my neighbors enough to show up, right? And to show up in droves, and to be very clear about what we are showing up to do and how we're showing up to vote. I also think, though, that some of this is about a return to, so on the internet we call it gatekeeping, right? Now, I remember in 2014, the term self-care was something that we only talked about in activist circles, right? We had heard Audre Lorde say, caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. She was speaking very specifically as a Black, queer, poor woman, right? She was not saying everybody go and get a pedicure and feel good about yourself. But that's what the brands want me to think she was saying. Because now self-care has left our community circles, our cultural circles, our spaces, and it has now been commodified and co-opted by places that figured out they can make money off of what they see as trendy language, right? So if we know that our cultural practices, our language, our values, our beliefs are literally trend-setting, are valuable to the rest of the world, then how about we treat those things as valuable to ourselves, right?
First and foremost.
How about we gatekeep a couple of those things and don't tell everybody exactly how we do what we do and how we do it so well and how we do it in ways that shock the world, because there's no way Black folks should be able to do what we've done given everything that's been done to us. How about we actually keep enough of that for ourselves instead of giving it away, such that we can get back to some of that rootedness that you're talking about? Because again, our culture is a culture of power sharing, not of power hoarding. Our culture is a culture of recognizing the power and importance of women as keepers of the culture, right? We know the ways in which Black women are making sure everybody is getting through, whether they're seen and heard or not, right? So actually, let's give Black women their flowers, make sure that they're seen and heard, and root ourselves in the cultural value that we bring, right? There's a broader conversation happening right now in the zeitgeist, for example, about Tory Lanez and Meg Thee Stallion, right? So if we don't know the story, Tory Lanez is a rapper from Canada, and he shot Meg Thee Stallion, also she's a much more popular rapper than him, to be clear, in the foot. And his sentencing just happened, and the conversation, he got sentenced to a very long sentence, and the conversation online is like, oh, what happened to all the abolitionists? I thought y'all didn't want nobody to go to jail. Well, hold up a second. What we're actually talking about is being radical enough to, as Angela Davis says, get to the root.
Get to the bottom.
So getting to the root means living in a world where abuse, intimate partner violence, gun violence, that those things aren't happening so often that we even have to worry about somebody being arrested because Meg was never shot in the first place. Right? Getting back to that rootedness, being radical enough to get to the root of the things that have been serving us for so long. We have been able to sustain ourselves and one another because we are a power sharing, not power hoarding culture. And I think that telling those stories, being honest about how none of us got to where we are by ourselves, because that individualism is a prevailing narrative of white supremacy culture, and counteracting those stories from everyday people is important. People need to know I'm not here by myself. That there are any number of people from Ferguson, from St. Louis, from Connecticut, from Detroit who could be sitting in this seat telling you even more impactful stories, right? And I'm here because of all of them. And there's a responsibility that we have, I think, to gatekeep those things that we know have been important to us, and not give them away such that they can't sustain us anymore.
Exactly.
All right, we got a question. Oh, hello.
Hello.
I want to know when y'all were protesting that 400 days, that's really longer than the Alabama boy
Yeah.
bus. But,
Yes, sir.
Did y'all? What about agitators? We saw on the news there was agitators that was coming in from the outside and trying to provoke more violence. So tell us a little bit about that.
If it's one thing I know how to do at my big age is pick out an undercover cop who don't want you to know he's undercover. And I learned that on the streets. There's a look. But there were lots of agitators, right? So some of them were coming from the police department and they'd be plain clothes. Some of them were people from a group called, what was it, the Oath Keepers? Some of them were people who tried to, they would try to integrate their message with yours to say, oh, we've got this interest convergence right here, but the rest of your interests are about holding us back systemically, right? So these folks would come in, and they would come in, to your point, to agitate, right? So they would want to rile people up. They would literally, and I don't mean this figuratively, literally throw rocks and hide their hands. So a lot of these times when you would see news coverage of somebody supposedly throwing a rock or a water bottle at the police, it wasn't us, it was one of them. We then, fast forward, saw a bunch of this happen in 2020, and because of what had happened to us in 2014, we knew what to look for. So there were places like in Minneapolis, there would be pallets of bricks just laying out in the street. Randomly, happened to be there on the night of the protest, just sitting there, waiting for somebody to throw. And if nobody threw it, one of the agitators would come along in their plain clothes and throw it in the window and run away, right? There's video evidence of this stuff. Like, I'm not making this up. And part of what we had to do was get wise very quickly and to communicate with each other very strategically. So whenever we would be out on the street, for example, and we were huddling up to make a quick organizing decision, there would always be multiple players in the space. So there would be people who were there to get their directives. There would be the organizer giving the directives, but there would always be a couple of people moving around the circle, trying to make sure everybody who was in the circle belonged in the circle, that there were not reporters in here, that there were not undercover agitators in here, that people who were trying to get in the circle knew, hey, actually you can come back over here in 10 minutes, but we gotta do this right now. Unfortunately, this is an age-old tactic. We know the FBI files that are written on us. We know that we're all being called Black identity extremists, and we know that some of those files are fake because some of those are for people who were sent to become agitators in this very thing. And again, this is a tactic that we've seen happen for decades, right? And some of those files have since been released. But yeah, they're all very real, and we've just had to be very wise and very strategic in the moment to make sure that we're sending the right messages and that we stop people from being pulled into activities that we know were set up to harm them. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
Hi.
First of all, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was wonderful watching another sister. So this is a twofold question.
I'm sorry, tell me your name.
My name is Chandra, but everybody call me Faye.
Okay, nice to meet you.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. So this is a twofold question. Do you think that there could be an organized protest without the death of a soul,
It's a great
a
question.
body?
Yeah.
Secondly, how?
Yeah, just a small question, not anything too complicated. I believe that the answer is yes, in part because I've seen it. There are multiple things that organize people, right? I've seen protests certainly about the stealing of a life, to your point. But I've seen protests about everything from bodily autonomy to Medicaid expansion to housing issues, right? People who are being gentrified out of their block. I've seen all of those things pull people together. I think in addition to your question, the question we always have to ask ourselves is, what is our sustained strategy? Because a protest is always about creating pressure and public knowledge, right? So protests as an activity, they get attention, right? So we know one of the things we learned from the blueprint of the 20th century civil rights movement is to make sure that the press is out there and make this thing dramatic enough that it is attractive for the press to cover it. Their press was very different than our press, right? A 24-hour news cycle where it bleeds and it leads and is highly sensationalized can be difficult to attract. So sometimes we have to go out there and drive our own press, create our own spaces like we did with the Ferguson newsletter. But a protest is to get that attention from people who might not have known that this was a problem or might not know that there are people organizing around this problem. The second thing it's there to do is to create pressure, right? Because a protest, especially multiple protests, put people on notice, right? So when Breonna Taylor was killed in Kentucky, in Louisville, it was during COVID. The challenge, of course, was that how are we going to have people protest and still be safe? Well, there are some people who said it's worth the sacrifice. There are other people who said, I'm going to figure out how to do this digitally. But the entire point was, however we do it, we're trying to put pressure on Daniel Cameron to not only actually arrest or, fire these officers and put them on trial, but to actually shift what this system looks like, because how in the world can you be asleep in your own bed and have your life taken from you by people who were supposed to serve and protect you, right? So I've seen protests be organized around those things, and it is a lot of footwork. It's a lot of knocking on doors and saying, did you know that this impacts you? Did you know that this mattered to you? It's also a lot of building trust. Some of the least sexy work is pulling people together to get a stop sign up in your neighborhood because people keep speeding through here and it's putting the kids in danger. But once 12 of us figure out that we can get the stop sign together, well, then we can go and recruit 12 more people and not only get another stop sign, we can get a stoplight. And then we've started to get on the right rhythm of things and realize, we actually have some power when we're organized and we're disciplined, and now we can get the stop sign, the stoplight, we can get a counselor at the school, we can get the library back open, we can buy the building back and put it in our name. We can do a whole lot of things that we didn't know we could do because we built trust in the small things, right? I'm being a good steward over the little things so that I can go and do the big things. The other thing, though, is that protest is always a part of a larger strategy. So if the protest is there to create pressure on whom and on what? Who or what is my target? Who or what is the thing that has the power to perform the action that I want? Is it the mayor? Is it the city council? Is it the hospital system? Where is the pressure that I'm trying to extend? Because that will dictate how I'm going to actually engage in the performance of the protest. And then what is my follow-up? Because once I've created the pressure, you need to know that we're serious about this thing, that we didn't do it for show, that it wasn't for the gram, right? There may have been 100 people out there who you will never see again, but you need to take the power of that 100 and extend it to that target so that they know, we're following up, baby. We're right here. We're here at your city and fire, and police meeting, right? We're here at your board of alderpersons meeting. And it might be only 10 of us this time, but we're gonna be here until you put the thing on the ballot that we need on there and you actually vote the right way. And if you don't vote the right way, guess what? We got somebody sitting right here in this chair that we're gonna vote in to replace you so that they can do the work that we need to do. That's the hard part. It's not sexy. It often does not attract the cameras and the attention that can attract other people, right? But it is what it takes to get it done. And I think that, unfortunately, our opponents know that very well. They went after Roe versus Wade for 50 years. Moms for Liberty ran over 200 candidates on tiny school boards across the country. They're the ones banning the books. They're the ones closing the libraries. Yeah, they can protest. They can also get Susie and Bonnie and all those on the school board to do what they need to do quietly. And nobody's thinking about Coral Springs, Florida, or Springfield, Missouri. But guess what? That's where the books are being banned. Right? That's where the teachers are getting fired, right? Because nobody was paying attention to the unsexy things. That kind of sustained action is truly what gets it done. And it doesn't take 1 million people to do it. It takes a dedicated group of individuals who are ready to be in it for the long haul, who know how to activate the 100 when it's necessary, but who know how to move as 10 when that's necessary too. I hope that answered your question.
These are our last two questions.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Sister, thank you for coming to Detroit. My name is Kenneth Reed.
Nice to meet you.
And I bring you greetings.
Thank you.
And you must have read my mind because I was about to ask you about an update or what your impressions on Daniel Cameron and by him, because I saw you organizing in Louisville.
Yeah.
And the fact that he is now a candidate for governor in Kentucky.
Yeah.
What are your impressions on that?
My impression on that is that Daniel Cameron is another long-term overseer project.
Woo.
Daniel Cameron was handpicked by Mitch McConnell.
Yep.
Mitch McConnell officiated Daniel Cameron's wedding. Okay, when I tell you they are like this, Mitch McConnell handpicked Daniel Cameron because he knew that in an increasingly multicultural democracy, he was going to need a black face on a white supremacist message. Yep. The person succeeding Mitch McConnell cannot look like Mitch McConnell.
Yep.
So Mitch McConnell is holding on to power for as long as he can in Kentucky, because his power is not just rooted in that Senate seat. It's rooted in all of his funders and donors that he's been cultivating for all of the years of his career that he passed right over to Daniel, that are now funding Daniel's run, right? It's in all of the knowledge and the relationships he built with people who made the pathway for him and are now making the pathway for Daniel. So Daniel, just like the attack on Roe versus Wade, just like Moms for Liberty, is a long-term project. The problem is Daniel is somebody who thinks white ice is colder, right? So he's been convinced by the amount to which he's been brought in the circle a little bit that that's what his freedom looks like. And that if he keeps parroting those same ideas, that he too will have access to the great American dream like Mitch McConnell has. Little does he know that they will drop him at any moment just like they'll do any of the rest of us. Why? Because he's not actually one of them. You can marry their daughters, you can run for their offices, you can have their same donors, you can live next to them, and you will never be them. So unfortunately, there are lots of people who see that reward and want that shine, right? We know who they are. We don't have to name them, but we know who the people are who figured out that that is a career path, that that is a path to prosperity, that that is a path to power. And so I think, once again, that we have to be as longitudinal and as wise as the opposition. And to be clear, the opposition is not white people. The opposition is people who are addicted to white supremacy. There are people who want freedom of all colors, and there are people who are addicted to the culture of white supremacy of all colors. Those of us on the winning side, on the right side, on the just side, have to be long-term and intentional about this thing. So, like, who are we running for school board?
Amen.
Who are we running for judge? Who are we making sure has the scholarship to the right law school right now so that they can go to the right law firm, so that they can do the right public interest work, so that they can be eligible to be a judge in 20 years?
It's chess, not checkers.
Chess, not checkers.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the question.
Hi, Brittany. Thank you for
Hi.
your work.
Thank you.
And so, my name is Kim,
Nice to meet you.
and you've been doing a lot of traveling across the country,
Yes.
and you talked about protest and what do we do afterwards to sustain. So I'm wondering, have you been able to identify any liberated zones, any beloved community practices
Yeah.
while you've been there, to be able to identify a creation that we want to go into after all of this?
That is such a fantastic question. I absolutely love that. And I've spent some time with Reverend Bernice King around the beloved community, specifically as what the architecture of our dream can look like, right? I think, and I hope I'm answering your question correctly, but I think some of the things I've observed is that, one, it takes a lot of humility. I talked about the smog of dominant culture before. The hard part about that smog is that we've all breathed it in, which means that we all breathe it out and exhale it on one another, even when that culture doesn't serve us, right? Even when that culture was not built for us. And so being humble enough to know when we are wrong, when we are operating against our own interests, when we are transferring our oppression to other people, when we have things to unlearn ourselves, that kind of humility is a necessary building block to that beloved community, because how can we get together if in the back of our minds we all think we're a little bit better than the person next to us, right? And that because when we operate in that humility, we recognize the role that everybody has to play in building that beloved community. That there's actually not a role or a person that is not necessary in that. I talk often about a woman named Mama Cat, who I met in Ferguson. Mama Cat runs an incredible organization for houseless people. She's a chef by trade. So she teaches houseless people the skills of her trade so that they can go and be employed, similar to what you all are doing here. But the other thing she did during the protest was that she fed us, right? She fed us during that uprising. She fed people who had lost their jobs because they were participating in the uprising. She fed people during holidays who were disconnected from their families because this is the work they had chosen to do. She fed us when it was just 2 a.m. and we were hungry and nothing was open, but nobody was staying open for us protesters. And how dare I look at a Mama Cat who made sure that we all knew we had somebody who cared about us as we were doing this work, because she was doing this work alongside us. How dare I think that her contribution is not just as important as anybody else's? So I think that humility is critical. I think an understanding of intersectionality is critical. There's a saying by an Aboriginal organizer named Lilla Watson. She said, if you have come here to help me, you are wasting your time. But if you have come here because you know our fates are bound up with one another's, then let us work together. There's freedom work that disabled people are doing that I need to be a part of because it helps me too. There's freedom work that indigenous people are doing that I need to be a part of because it helps me too. And because morally, it's the right thing to be connected to. And I think holding on to that moral center that says none of us are free until all of us are free is essential to building that beloved community. The last thing I'll say is radical, radical, radical love. There is a saying by Dr. King that I actually built some of my own personal philosophy and then my business off of, where he talks about the importance of the combination of love and power. He talks about love on its own being anemic, right? Being what's the word that he used? Being sentimental, right? He talked about power on its own being reckless and violent and harmful. But if we actually recognize that we all have inherent and innate power, and we inform that power with love, then not only is there nothing that we can't do, but we can actually use that power to stop everything that stands in the way of love. Dr. West says that justice is what love looks like in public, right? So I don't ever want any of us to think, or to forget rather, that the roots of our labor, the roots of our movements is in love. Because I love Michael Brown, right? Even though I didn't know him. I love Breonna Taylor, even though I did not know her. And I hope that people love me enough that if something ever happened to me, that they'd show up, right? Not because I'm special, but because I'm human and I have value. And when we operate in that, I think we can recognize one another's not only gifts and talents, but one another's inherent value to be a part of that beloved community, to be deserving of that beloved community. Thank you for the question.
All right, this is our last question. Go ahead.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate the fact that you took time to come and be with us and speak with us this evening. What you just said, yes, we do love you enough, care about you enough, and appreciate what you have shared with us. I have 2 questions. One, on the program that we watch, do you have the right to say what you think, or do they try to script you?
That's a great question. They are not trying to script me. I say what I want. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Okay, well, the other question is, do you have a strategy when you have a person running for office like we have had here in Detroit who is not black? But on the other side, we have 8 or 9 black folk, which means they cancel each other out. Do you have a strategy to fight against that?
Ooh, Ooh-wee. Okay, I'm gonna answer this question without knowing all the people involved, so don't go around Detroit being like, Brittany said that you ain't up. Please don't do that, okay? I don't know all the people involved. But in general, thank you for the question. First of all, they don't script me. I still, though, however, know that there is a cost to being your authentic, true self on television, especially when you are a Black woman. Shout out to my good sis, Tiffany Cross. We were talking about this backstage. I operate in understanding that anybody who hires me, fires me, signs my checks, whatever, does not have a heaven or hell to put me in. And there's truly nothing that they can do to me that God won't protect me from as long as I'm operating in his purpose. So I just try to stay rooted in that when it feels risky, which it often does. To your second question, we dealt with this in St. Louis because the first time Tashara Jones ran for mayor, she lost by 888 votes. I will never in my life forget that number. And she lost because a number of Black folks, unfortunately in our case, Black men specifically, who had no chance of winning, would not step aside and have enough humility to say, what I care about is the forward progression of the city more than I care about my own name being at the top of the masthead, right? So, and to be clear, everybody tried to have the conversation, right? Donors were like, maybe you should just go ahead and pull out. We got something else for you. And she lost by 888 votes because those votes got split by other people that would have gone to her. But in the end, she won in part, and this is why I brought up the importance of movement, because when she ran again, it was the people who had her back. And I know that this looks different in every city, and I know that there are incredible efforts happening in Detroit on all manner of things. But when she ran I can only speak from the experience that I know, when she ran for re-election, there were a number of folks in movement who had spent the time between the first election and the second election holding those people who had blocked that election, holding their feet to the fire. So that by the time the second election came around, plenty of those people didn't even have the nerve to put their name back in the ring. Because they had been, they had been seen for who they are, because the movement had a communication strategy that said, you've been getting in the way of progress, and here's your record on that. And we're gonna make sure that people know. And we're not going to wait until election year to make sure that people know that, right? And in doing that, I'll say pre-work and making sure that work came ahead of an election year, that helped a lot of people see the truth and then push a lot of those people out before they even had to be convinced to be pushed out. And I know that all of this is challenging because there are all number of interests when you talk about any election, but I hope that's helpful. Thank you so much.
Let's give her a big hand. Just indulge me for about 3 or 4 moments. First thing I want to say to you is that if it were to occur, I would not be waiting for them to come after you to show up to protect you. I'll let them know in advance right now, don't mess with you. And I've been known to fight for some folks, I fought for Kwame to the last day.
You're going to bring your phone.
And when he retired, when he resigned, I was 1 or 2 people he thanked on TV. And 2 days later, my lawyer called me because the feds were demanding all my financial records. But I had never taken any money from him. So they went through everything, and they were really frustrated as hell. They put one item in his indictment about some transaction with John Rutherford, who had the Detroit Rescue Mission, who made a $34,000 contribution to Dabo and suggested that he did that in exchange for some favor for the mayor. And my lawyer said, don't say nothing. Because if you say something, they're going to come after you, blah, blah, blah. Couple more things real quick, just indulge me. Number one is, I'm kind of radical too. So Dabo created this slogan. We got copywritten hats and T-shirts because people are always trying to define us. You can be a Black surgeon. You can be develop the means of landing on the Mars. But when it comes to white folks, you still just Black. Y'all didn't get that. That's why the man who invented plasma died, not able to get it. So we have that slogan. And nobody runs from us. We're in suites and, you know, the mayor's office and all that. But I want to remind folks, we're a black organization, and when it comes to it, that's all you see us as is just black. Secondly, in terms of the mayor's race, a little bit different. There will be a primary, then a general election, so it'll be whittled down to two top people. What we have going on in Detroit right now is that they know it's going to be a black mayor. The question is, can we get one that belongs to us? One that we control. And that's why, I'm going to be honest, they go after my daughter like she does because she's independent and she's popular and she don't owe anybody anything. And let me say this, we don't support our politicians with our dollars, so we have to get other folks to finance them, and the people who pay for that stuff get the ear of politicians. We got to start spending more of our money paying for folks who we want to see in public office. Now, last two things I'm done. You said about those pile of bricks they put out there. Yeah. Two things that my dad always said that I love, I use it all the time. He said, son, what's the difference between a pile of bricks and a cathedral? Organization. Bricks are organized. Son, in our community, we have a pile of bricks, but we need to organize. We have everything we need to force and coerce people to pay us attention and not have to do things that we do. And I like protests. I've had the biggest protest in Southeast Michigan, I think, ever at Fairlane. 15,000 folks when they killed that young man, choked him to death. 20,000 on the freeways they wouldn't let get there. But we got sold out on that because the pressure waned. Let me just say the last thing is, thank you, Jesus. You don't mind, do you? The biggest problem we have is personalities. And this is another one of the things my dad said. My dad said the problem with us is it might be the right what, but if we don't like the who, we make sure the what never happens. You ain't got to like me for me to support you. And let's find ways for us to collaborate, to work together. I'm going to give kudos to this woman right here, Theo Broughton. Theo, we did something in history here with the Big Gas campaign. Had a black woman, 78 years old, beaten, locked in the gas station. And when we talked to the community, they said, that's what happens when you don't own nothing. And we organized as the biggest campaign that was all over the world. And we bought gas and we saved black gas stations. But what did we do, Theo? We didn't just protest, we organized. Theo went out the next day and had every black-owned gas station in Detroit on a list. I didn't have a list. She had the list. So everybody has some information for transformation. Let's make it happen. Finally, don't forget Dr. West on the 27th of September. A couple sponsors dropped out because he announced he was running for president. So some of the corporate folks didn't want to support that. But that's my man, and he got something great to say. Amen? God bless all you. Let me introduce Caroline. Caroline, stand up, Caroline, is with Graham Media that owns Channel 4, which is a part of the NBC affiliate. They do a lot of our advertising and they support the work that we do. So God bless everybody. If there's something that need to be done before you ask somebody else to do it, look at yourself and try your best to do it on your own. Thank you so much. We'll take a few photos. I want to start with my host and my guest and me, and then my board and everybody else. If she feels that way, we can take pictures.